Krystal, what are you taking a look at?
Well, guys, there's a new round of polling from the Dems, who are desperately and hopelessly probably trying to maintain their grip on the House. According to Politico, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, or DCCC, has commissioned polling that finds Democrats currently at a 4-point disadvantage to Republicans in battleground districts that's on the generic ballot. To be honest with you, I actually would have thought those numbers would start off a little bit worse than that. Overall, the poll finds that some significant number of battleground voters think the party is, quote, preachy, judgmental, and focused on culture wars. Kind of hard to argue with them on any of that. But where things go from bad to historic disaster is when the pollsters factor in the impact of the GOP's own culture war messaging on issues like critical race theory, defund the police, and immigration. When those attacks go unanswered, the Democrats go from 4 points down to 14 points in the hole. Seems like a pretty simple story, right? Democrats have gone too far left on cultural issues. They're out of step with the country. They need to forcefully pivot back to the center to have a prayer at winning the public. This analysis is, in certain ways, totally correct. And it's hard to disagree with, considering how unpopular left messaging is on culture and on identity. That's not an argument against the morality of left positions on some of those issues. In my opinion, they're a mixed bag of good and bad and fantastical. It's just a basic acknowledgement that it's nearly all a massive uphill climb as it's concerned with the public. But you won't be surprised to learn that the Dem establishment line, regurgitated here by Politico, obscures as much as it ultimately illuminates. First of all, this analysis says literally nothing about economics. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen a single poll in your life, but voters have been shouting at anyone who will listen that the economy is their number one concern. Economy, inflation, healthcare. The issue set that determines whether or not they're going to make rent and put fresh vegetables or ramen noodles on the table. And it is insanely clear that the, quote, moderate approach on these issues has been a disaster. On Monday, I showed you the evidence that focusing on material well-being is still potent politics. The end of the child tax credit has sent Dem performance tumbling among those voters who benefited from that credit, while overall Dem performance over the same time period remained static. So in other words, people who got the credit and then lost it abandoned Dems at a time when the rest of the public was actually holding steady. Why isn't the DCCC talking about that? Where's the polling on how the White House's unwillingness to use executive orders to cancel debt or expand healthcare has been a total disaster? Or the White House's total capitulation on core issues like lifting the minimum wage or expanding union rights? Where's the polling on the obsessive quest among moderates to give the wealthy a tax break through the SALT tax? Or our frontliner Elaine Luria's opposition to banning stock trades among members of Congress? Or the efforts of centrists like Kathleen Rice to protect Big Pharma's ability to price gouge the public? The Democratic Party's refusal to deliver on the issues that voters actually care about, though, is a double whammy of electoral devastation, because not only does it leave voters frustrated and struggling when it comes to their core concerns, it also makes it inevitable that elections will be fought primarily on the grounds of culture, which is exactly why our politics so completely and totally suck. And this is where the terrain is much more perilous for Democrats. Makes sense, right? If you aren't going to actually attempt to meet voters' material needs and make an economic case, then voters are going to primarily choose candidates based on culture war signaling. Culture war isn't exactly a new phenomenon in American politics, but it's worth considering the pioneer of the current version of the Democratic Party, which leans so heavily on identity and culture and relies so little on working-class economics. Spoiler alert. It's not the left. After all, I'm old enough to remember when Bernie Sanders ran on a universalist working-class message and was relentlessly smeared as a sexist and a racist and just an all-around bigot because he leaned into a class-first message in 2016. So who's the person we should blame for the current electorally and morally disastrous version of the Democratic Party? For that answer, we can turn to a much more complete and less propaganda-filled analysis just published in the American Prospect by Stan Greenberg. Now, Stan's got the picture of our villain right here on the screen, right at the top, and a headline which implores Democrats to please, for the love of God, speak to working-class discontent. Now, before I dive in, let me establish Stan's credibility on these issues. He's a longtime mainstream Democratic pollster who has a sort of revered status in political circles because he was the person who identified the phenomenon of the Reagan Democrat. These were lunch bucket type white working class voters who switched from being reliable Democratic voters to Republican voters during the Reagan era, presaging the continued white working class realignment, which has of course come into dramatic focus during the Trump years. Stan's focus on Macomb County, Michigan, has led reporters and politicos to flock to that blue-collar suburb for years now to try to read the tea leaves of the Rust Belt white male. And he is now sounding the alarm bells that the same trend he observed among white working-class voters has now bled over to all races of working-class voters. And Stan knows when this trend, which spells doom for the Democratic Party, begins. That would be under Barack Obama. It was under Obama that his own trailblazing identity was offered as a substitute for working-class economics. It was under Obama that homeowners were hung out to dry and bankers were let off the hook. His re-election and continued personal popularities created a sort of optical illusion that his mode of politics was really successful. But if you just scratch a little bit below the surface of those metrics, you see that his 8 years in office were a time of destruction for Democrats, among rural voters and among the working class, leading to massive losses in the House, the Senate, state legislatures, governors' mansions, and culminating, of course, with the election of Donald J. Trump. Here's what Stan Greenberg has to say about the message that the Obama political project continues to send to the multiracial working class. Quote, "To be sure, Obama is America's most esteemed political leader nationally and in countries around the world. But by calling in Obama in every election, Democrats are telling voters they prioritize his political project. Presenting themselves as the party of Obama implies not only that Democrats represent a diverse, multicultural America, which is true, but also that they represent the voters who are doing well and want to help those who are still struggling. It says Democrats are not angry about the deepening inequality and corruption that has allowed big corporations and the top 1% to write the rules for all of us. It says Democrats are out of touch with working people." And of course, far more important than the electoral consequences for the losers in the Democratic Party is what this commitment to personal identity and cultural signaling to the affluent over and above material politics has meant to the lives of working class Americans. Now look, the modern GOP, they've always been the party of the rich. The Democrats largely joining them has meant the complete abandonment of most of the country. Now if you step back for a minute, it's preposterous to imagine that the disastrous shape of the Democratic Party is because of the left. The left is completely powerless, guys. They exist to get dunked on by a bunch of corporatists who still lionize James Carville. But the people with real power in the party have closed the door to leaning into the left economic policies, which are actually popular and which could actually reclaim their working class base. So they do their best to generate sister-soldier moments and scold the left on culture, even as their own failings are the very reason why these cultural issues have taken over all of politics. It's Nancy Pelosi kneeling in kente cloth while proclaiming that she has a right to insider trade because of the free market for all eternity. Just can't imagine why it's not working out. Sagar, I don't know if people took note of how extraordinary it is for Stan Greenberg
it's huge.
to basically trash Obama in this. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching.
That's right. Just as a reminder, you can become a premium subscriber today. Watch the full show completely uncut, our reactions to each other's monologues. You get to listen to it. You get to ask us questions, all that good stuff. Link is right there in the description or at breakingpoints.com.
Best of all, great way to say screw you to the mainstream media.